we today are going to be talking about the data table in DataGraph and version 5.0 and some improvements that we've made, very much based on suggestions that people have had. The data table in version 5.0 did not have huge changes go on in it, but there are a couple of changes that we made that I think are definitely worth highlighting. And as I said, were very much driven from comments that people had of things that they were looking for. So the first thing that I wanted to do is actually just start with a data set that we'll download so I can demonstrate some of this. This is a set of soils data that I thought would be useful for some of the things that we're going to demonstrate. And let me see, where am I? Here we go. Let me open up a window on Safari so that you can see this set of data. So the link that I posted is to a web page that has this. This is, as any of you who attend these know, I use examples from this quite a bit. This is a data set. It's called Soils. It is a data set that is in the R datasets repository, and here's a copy of it here. So I'm just going to copy this data. So I'll just do a Command A to select all, and then I'll copy this and bring it right into a DataGraph file and paste the data in. And so this is just to look at this a little bit. What is this data? It is a set of soils data where we have multiple dimensions associated with this data. This first column, I'll just get rid of that because that's just an index column, and DataGraph has its built-in index. The other things we have here are related to where these soil samples were taken: top, slope, depression, different locations, different depths. You know, this looks like another code in terms of indicating where the samples were. And then also each location appears to have 4 different samples or blocks. Maybe this is at different physical locations within that general area. I have to admit, I didn't read all the ins and outs of this data, but you can see there's a number of different columns here, and with different things. We have the pH of the soil, nitrogen. This looks like this is the density, phosphorus, calcium, and other elements, conductivity. So the first thing that I wanted to show you, that was something that people had requested on the discussion board, and we definitely agreed that this seems like a good thing to add, is the ability to hide and show multiple columns without having to place the columns in a group. In the past, if you wanted to hide and show multiple columns, really the easiest way was to place it in a group. But what if you don't want to group your data? So here, for example, you can hide and show individual columns with this checkbox here, and then that just hides that from the data table, but you still see the object that represents that column over here on the left-hand side. And if you, but again, if you wanted to highlight or hide a bunch of these columns, say you were really at this point wanted to focus on the elemental data, but you didn't really want to see all of these different types of categories, and you wanted to hide this data, then the easiest way would be to select the column. So you can click and drag to select. Again, this is in the past, what you would do, or what I would do all the time. Put something in a group, and then you could just hide the entire group. That still can be a very useful thing to do. But if you don't want to have things in a group, then that might mess up the way you have things organized. So now what you can do is you can highlight the columns. You can do it from the control list here. or data list, or you can highlight the columns here and click the gear menu of the data table. So that's right here in the top left-hand corner of the data table. There's a bunch of different things that you can do here, but one of them is to hide selected columns. And when I do that, it's going to uncheck all those columns for me, but again, not having to place it in a group. So if you say you want now to bring these columns back, you obviously can't see them anymore in the data table, but you can highlight the objects here within the data list, go back to this gear menu, and then there's the option of show selected columns, and that will just bring them all back. You can't do it quite here from the data table because they're hidden. So you can do either way. You can toggle them on or off. And it is sort of nice that if you do want to hide things when that list is closed, then you can, easily do that here with using that gear menu without always having to have that open. Now let's move on to the next thing that I wanted to show you. And this is related to normalizing and scaling groups of columns. The way that this is done actually is to use groups. So in this case, I want to take all of my data that I'm going to focus on here is the elemental data. So I'll just move aside the density and conductivity, and this is the set of columns that I'm going to focus on. So I might as well use the functionality that we already talked about. I can go ahead and take these columns that I'm not going to use right now and hide them. And for the rest of the columns that are showing, in order to do this normalization, I do need to place them in a group. I can do that very easily, click and drag, highlight these. At least that's how I pretty much always do that when I'm putting things in a group. And then click on this group icon up here. Oops. So now they're in my group. And here's we'll just say my elemental data. And now on the group itself, again, gear menu right over here. I'm going to click that. And you see now that there's two options that we're going to demonstrate. One is normalize and one is scale with a column. If I click the first one, what happens is that the data that I have for each one of these columns is now normalized between 0 and 1. This is a functionality that already was in DataGraph for an individual number column. So for example, if I wanted to take this column here and let's see, I think it's under mapping shortcuts. So either clicking the gear menu on the column object, or you can control click from the header. There's a number of shortcuts that are available for just giving you shortcuts to creating different types of mathematical expressions that are useful. So there's a number of them here that are shortcuts. Scale from 0 to 1 is one of them. And that's essentially what the normalizing is. Well, actually, I guess I should check let's see what this is. So you can see if I go into the column that I created using this within this group, you can go back over here to look at the data for n is using this expression is what's normalized. So if you wanted to see the mapping shortcuts, actually, let's just do both scale 0 to 1. Actually, I am now curious if this normalized does something different. Okay. So one is they are normalizing slightly differently. So the scale to 0 to 1 is what the normalize is doing for this entire group of data. The column here is slightly different. It's actually normalizing it around a value of 1. It's actually something, maybe we should make that terminology a little bit more consistent in retrospect. But in any case, if you ever want to, again, use any of these, it is creating an expression column. It will show you what it's doing, and you can see what that value is. So the normalizing in the group sense that we added is really scaling between 0 to 1. A question about what if the data range is above 1? Well, the normalizing is using whatever the range is and just making sure that all that data is between 0 to 1. So you can have values like you can see here. Let me just get rid of this extra one. The values for nitrogen are less than 1. And yet when I normalize, so this is the unnormalized column for nitrogen. You can see this is going from less than 0.05 to 0.03. Here's my little quick graph. If I select instead the nitrogen column to see how it's normalized, the bins here show it going below 0, but really this is 0 to 1.1 is the actual numerical value. You can see it in the mins and the max that are given here in the corners. But if you look at the data for any of these now in this normalized group, they're all going between a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 1, even though the original data, if I go over here now to my phosphorus data, this went up to 450. So if it's, if you have less than 1, it'll it'll make the maximum 1. If it's greater than 1, it'll make the maximum 1. And I know, in my field we do contaminant transport modeling is one of the things that I've worked on professionally. And that's a very common thing for us to do, is to have chemicals. Specifically, I work in groundwater, chemicals in groundwater that are all at different concentrations. And if we're plotting them together, we often want them to be normalized to the maximum concentration that they reported, and that makes it much easier to plot the data together. So that's the normalize way of scaling. Let me show you the other option that we have here, because I think this is also pretty useful. So let's just hide the normalized group of columns that I created and go back to this group and look at the other option, which is scale with column. And what you see here is a list of all the other columns that are in the data group. So if I want to scale based on phosphorus to have a ratio between these different elements, so I can just click that. And what it does is it now creates another group. So it's staying nested within this overall group. And the group name shows you that it's scaled, and it gives you the name of the element or the name of the column that is being used to scale it. So again, if I go over here and I want to see what the expression is actually doing, these are pretty simple. It's just creating N divided by P, calcium divided by P, and so forth. So you can go down and check these, but that's really all it's doing. So it's a way to do this quickly. One of the reasons this works is the way that expressions within DataGraph operate are based on a descendants type of a way of looking at what an expression has available to it. So for example, right here, if I take this particular column and I dragged this and moved it out, now it still works. It actually will still see the the data in this group. But if I place this expression in a totally different group, notice now it's going to say that the N and the P are missing. It doesn't see the data in those other groups. It's really things that are at the same level or things that are below nested within a particular group that the expression will be able to pick up. There are ways to, if you have data in another group that you want to refer to in an expression, you can do a Unix type of mapping or showing what the name of the group is. I won't do that here. That's on there's an article on that on the help if you're interested in how to do that. But anyway, for this, let's just go ahead and we'll bring this back to where it was. And now you can see where here's all my scale columns. So if you wanted to do another one, again, click this, scale with column. I can pick another column in the group. But this is one of the reasons why you're not going to see in this selection, it doesn't give you the option of scaling with other columns that aren't in that main group, because it's created in such a way to ensure that the appropriate columns are being used to scale these, if that makes any sense. So I could go ahead and add as many of these as I like, and I'll have those scaled values. And again, it's just going to show them all within the same group. Just to show a little bit of how is this helpful to even have these in these groups like this. Let me show you. Let's just go ahead and do. Yeah, maybe I'll start with just the raw data itself so that you can see what this looks like. This actually, again, if I'm just plotting according to these groups, then you can see these categories. So each one of these they're for, different, again, the top, the slope, the depression. I could certainly use masks to pull out just the data that I wanted to see, but actually, let me just put a different color on these so that hopefully you can see these well. What I really want to illustrate a little bit actually is how you can use the name of the group as a title or a label when you want to change what data is being represented. So here, for example, I'm currently just using the data that's in the group elemental. I'm using the raw data that's in the group elemental data. So if I want to show that group that's being plotted here, this is one of the options for tokens. You've probably, or maybe you haven't, know what a token is. If you don't, this is where you have those little blue it's like a text variable that I can add. So here, for example, for just the X label and the Y label, I could go ahead and show those. So right now, this is just using the row number, and it's giving me the element nitrogen here as being the one that's being plotted. But you can also use tokens in our title. So if I wanted the element label to be shown here, I could do that. One thing that I often do is if you expand the Canvas settings, there's a way to scale up just the title font there to make it a little bigger. So what I also want to show you again is this using the group. So if I take just to the right of this text box and look down this list, notice how it says Y. Before I picked Y label, now I'm going to pick Y group. And you'll see here's my elemental data for nitrogen. Now, one thing that is what I want to illustrate is how when you have groups like this set up, and you replace the data with the scaled data, because I have set up this token here using the name of the group, it's going to replace the title with, for example, the normalized title here. So let me show you how this is done. Go down here. Here on the left, I have these groups. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag this group object and drop it onto my command where I'm plotting this nitrogen data currently. And when I do that, it changed the data, but it also changed the title to indicate that I'm plotting the normalized version of the data. So I could do the same thing here with my scaled data, click the group, drag it and drop it. And now you can see I have the nitrogen scaled with phosphorus data being shown. So this is, I guess, illustrating two things. If you haven't really used a lot of the drag and drop for replacing with entire groups, this can be a really handy thing to do. Actually, let me take this to one level further, because right now I'm just dragging and dropping this group of data onto one command. I could have just replaced the column here. I didn't actually necessarily need to do the whole group. But say you make a more intricate graph where you have not just nitrogen, where we also have, I'll go ahead and make a copy. Actually, I'll do the option drag, hold the option key, drag this to make a copy. Let's go ahead and show the calcium, put this over on the right. Now, what's one of the problems here? These are very, very different scales, because I have this is not the normalized data. This is all scaled with phosphorus, but it's, very different concentration. So I guess one thing that I would want to do here if I'm doing multiple chemicals is I would not want to have this Y label here as my Y axis. This would be my, maybe I would just call this concentration. And then I might want to have a label within each of these graphs showing what is being plotted. I tend to like to have the box style here for this, and I can add a text label. Oops. I'm going to actually add two of them, one on each side, and I'm going to put another, again, a Y label. So this would be for my nitrogen. There we go. And my calcium, there's that one. Okay, so I have my two labels. Let me go ahead and make these bigger. I try to use the style settings when I'm doing things like this, so I can have all my labels kind of scaled up similarly. So now they're much, much larger. And I will also, I'm going to get rid of this label that's here. So just delete that. Okay, so now I have, again, I've got two different commands, and I want to replace everything that is on this graph here. Let's actually use the swap to go ahead and put all the commands here so you can see this. So to do this, what I would do first is, or to make this work, to demonstrate what I'm trying to show you how you can, again, use these whole groups to update data. I'm going to drag these commands. I'm going to place them in a group. So here's my commands. And now, with all of them in one group, I'm going to switch from using my scaled data to using the normalized data. So I'll go over here to this group, drag it and drop it. And now it's updated all the data. It updated the label because it's coming from this different group. My column names didn't change, so it's, which it shouldn't have. So I still have my nitrogen and my calcium here. So anyway, I wanted to show you that because I think if you're not used to using groups and aren't aware of how you can easily update. So I could, for example, here, if I clone this graph and I want to, now that I've made a version, say that I like, but I do want to have a scaled version, I could go ahead and drag that here. So now I have both of my graphs. And if I wanted one, scaled with a different element, I can go ahead and make another copy. And now let's put that one in. So anyway, so the data here, again, just kind of giving an example so that you can see how this works. One of the other things that I think is kind of cute that we added, that was a user request, is when you have a note field on a column. So if you've ever used these pop-up notes, you click on the gear menu on a column and there's an add note functionality that gives you these little pop-up notes that, and in these pop-up notes, I can just type whatever I want into these. You can put HTML links, other, whatever you want to put in there. And with these little notes, now if you have to take your data and export it into Excel, for example, then let me actually just hide this. So say, here's just again, just showing for illustrative purposes. My first column has a note. Let me add a note to my second column. Here's, another note. And if I now want to export this to a spreadsheet, and let's see, we would go under File, Export Data. Of course, we love you doing everything in DataGraph, but we know sometimes your work may be shared with others who are not quite on board with DataGraph yet. So here, anyway, it's going to make an Excel file for me. It's a format that I have selected. There's other formats that you can do here, but you can export right into a spreadsheet. And then if you open that spreadsheet, so here's my sheet, which actually I don't have Excel on my computer. It's opening in numbers. But anyway, you can see the data that was exported. And then there's now a notes tab that will list each column that has a note and whatever note is there. So if you're needing to document something that you've done, I think this is a useful functionality too. And again, was something that was requested from a user. And I guess other than that, things related to data, if you ever use scripting with DataGraph, there's the DGraph scripting commands that you can use. Those have been improved a bit also to be able to use Excel spreadsheets as input. And so not something I'm going to go over now, but that's another thing that we've done. Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and wrap things up for today. And again, so next week we'll talk about commands. And with that, I hope everyone has a good weekend. And thanks so much for joining today.